Sorry, we're just about to start. Thank you so much for being here. Great, so welcome back everyone. We're delighted to host our first paper presentation session for the day. The theme of this session that you're in now is virtual learning. Sorry, did someone say something? All right, so I'm just going to start by introducing this session. The theme for the day is virtual learning in this room. Thank you for being here to watch our presenters talk about virtual learning and different takes on virtual learning. We have our chair with us, Dr. Indrajit Roy, Senior Lecturer at the Department of Politics at the University of York. Thank you so much, Indrajit, for being here and sharing our presentations for today. All of our presenters are here. So I think that we're ready to begin now. Shall I just hand over to you, Dr. Roy?
Yes, that's great.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Mohini, and a very warm welcome to everyone. I am privileged to be here, to be invited to chair. So without further ado, I think we can proceed to invite our papers. Each of our papers, each of our presenters will have 10 minutes to speak, followed by 5 minutes of question and answers. I would request all our paper presenters to stick to the 10 minutes. I will, at the end of 8 minutes, start waving my hands or maybe even interrupt you, so apologies in advance. For audience members who are joining us, if you could please type in your questions and answers into the Q&A box rather than the chat box, that'll be fantastic. Given the interest in the presentations, we may not be able to take all questions, but it will be good to have them on board. Again, I'm not Cameron Warner, as it's might be mentioned in your sort of leaflets in the publication. I'm Indrajit Roy, and I'm very happy to be chairing this panel on virtual learning. Our first paper is titled Education in a Digitally Divided World, a Post-Pandemic Research Agenda for Equitable Societies in South Asia, by Robin Shields, Swati Banerjee, PK Shajahan, Dinesh Chand, and Gayathri Krishnan. So I hand over to the panelists. I'm not sure how you want to go about this, but the next 10 minutes are all yours. Over to you.
Thank you, Anjali, and thanks to others. Let me share my screen. Okay. So essentially, to begin with, we're talking about actually being in a historically, historical crossroad where essentially the past speaks of multiple iniquities and the future is uncertain too. So within this context, we are trying to see how do we locate the digital divide and how does it interface with education, especially within the context of South Asia, which speaks of multiple dimensions of poverty and inequities, and also how it's linked to the educational crisis. So these are some glimpses of the inequities which we are hearing, we are reading, and of course, in the last 2 days, we have been discussing as well. So when we are talking about some of these inequities, I'll give you a quick glimpse of this narrative of a college girl in Delhi who committed suicide, essentially because there was lockdown, the hostel was closed, she had to return back home. She needed a laptop. She was very good in studies, but her father had already taken a huge loan, to send her to the college, and he couldn't buy that laptop, and she committed suicide. And one of her words was, "If I can't study, I can't leave." And that's the extreme reality in which many of the students are staying in South Asia and in India. On the other side, you could see child on a tree, and this is actually a glimpse of a child in a rural in a village in Orissa, and every single day The children there have to go up on the treetops to access internet. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to attend classes. And these are not isolated incidents. These are not isolated examples. This essentially talk about the, the multiple social inequities that exist in South Asia and in India, which talks about there are, statistics to say that there are only 8% of homes with young members who have access to computers with internet. And the digital divide is further aggravated with the various intersectionalities that exist in terms of class, gender, caste, ethnicity, religion, religious minority groups, etc., etc. So essentially, this is to say that we are, neither talking within the context of pandemic, within the context of virtual education. Therefore, we are not talking about, this is not new, neither is this normal. In the past, it has often been invisibilized, it has often been normalized. But therefore, how do we look at the present? And some of the questions emerging from there is, therefore, how do we understand this, context and relationship between social inequity and educational inequity? Within this context of the pandemic, therefore, how do we understand the new social needs that is emerging? And therefore, what is the way forward, or what are the social innovations that's trying to address some of these challenges or some of these larger social needs? So therefore, the theoretical, I will come back to the theoretical constructs within which it's located, but looking at some of the people's voices, how does that play out? And how do we understand this societal context, which has been existing much before the pandemic? It has only got deepened and sharpened within the context of the pandemic. This short narrative and a voice is about, we were in a rural, we were in a village in India, a remote village, and we're trying to do a participatory skill gap analysis also within the larger context of trying to trace the educational inequity and social inequity and livelihood insecurity. And with, trying to understand the knowledge, experience, and aspiration of the rural women. And we found that through participatory ways that they have come up with Gayathri, where they said that they have knowledge, they have experience, and they want to do something in terms of a micro enterprise to secure their livelihoods. That was a tool as well. But I realized that there is something more. And there was a little child sitting next to the woman. And I asked her, do you want your child also to get into Gayathri? And her immediate and spontaneous reply was, of course not. I want her to become an university teacher like you. And I think that's the voice that we are trying to capture. There is this unfree agency and there is this aspiration. And often this aspiration gets caught within the mediated reality of their daily lives. And how do we actually locate those voices? How do we understand those knowledges? And that's where our theoretical construct is located. One, in terms of the ecology of knowledges, where we are trying to see how do we reclaim this marginalized voices, how do we legitimize that, and how do we co-create that? And of course, how do we understand intersectional voices within those and try and understand the multiplied inequities and the differential impacts. So we draw some findings from our collective study with all the members of this paper. Essentially, there are these two studies. One is trying to understand the organizational perspectives and accountability in learning in India and Nepal, and the other which is an emerging study, trying to understand the innovations that are emerging within the context of the COVID, and of course, the new social needs that's trying to address. So from the first study, we kind of bring some findings, which is trying to address this root causes. So when we are saying that some of these needs are not just new, it's located within the overall context of social inequity in South Asia. So there are various things which emerge, which talks of, for example, the voices of teachers talking about how little time the parent has to spend with the children and their studies, essentially largely because they come from the informal sector. Often the parents teachers meeting time coincides with their job timings and they're not able to attain that. Of course, there is extreme poverty, there is migration, and often the migrants, for example, in the city of Mumbai, stay in makeshift houses. There is very little space for the children to study. There is, of course, caste and gender and ethnicity-based stigma that many of the first generation learners also face. And therefore, how do we see its manifestation? Again, bringing this from one of our recent study, which is highlighting the innovative cases and trying to understand this new emerging social needs, where the teachers talk about how the parents do not have devices, and they feel how would they tell the parents when they don't have money for survival, when they don't have money to eat, to buy mobile phones for for their children to be able to do this virtual learning. And what essentially emerges, like many of these studies, is that there is lack of devices, there is lack of internet, there is lack of electricity. Migration, reverse migration has been a huge problem. I think many of you have seen this, in social media, in media, that how thousands of people from, especially Mumbai, from the city of Mumbai, has been migrating. They, due to the harsh lockdowns, they traveled thousands of miles on foot, sometimes dying on the way, along with their children, along with their families, back to their home in the towns and villages. And because of all this, there has been huge dropout. And many of the teachers have said that they have been trying to trace some of these migrant families and the migrant students back, but still there has been more than 10% of students who still remain unaccountable, and they are not able to trace them. So how do we understand this, this deepening inequities within the context of trying to understand social inequity and educational inequities? Yes.
2 minutes, Swati.
Yeah, thank you. So within this context, we are trying to see, therefore, in conclusion, what is the way forward? And we're trying to understand some of the newer innovations, newer strategies. And we realize that from some of the experience, for example, Hand in Hand India talks about, if children can't come to the school, can we take school to the children? So we are talking about neighborhood groups, neighborhood learnings, blended formats, not just the virtual formats. We are looking at, for example, within a country like India and other countries in South Asia. So grassroots innovation become the core. Simultaneously, we are also talking about, how do we address the larger structural inequities, where there is a gender divide, there is a class divide, caste divide, and how do we address that within the digital divide context? And of course, how do we make accessible the devices to children? And in TISS, for example, we are trying to look at how do we, kind of get the old devices from people, distribute it to the children and to the students. And of course, from our project, we try and see how the teacher are trying to make small innovations in terms of trying to create this WhatsApp group, etc., etc. So the idea is that, therefore, how do we look at social innovation as a transformative pathway to address some of the emerging social needs? And as has been said in one of our papers that we have written, that for something to change meaningfully, we need to actually approach the world and the solutions in a more meaningful way. So how do we do that? Perhaps that needs more collaboration, more dialogue, more learning from each other. So I think that's where I would conclude. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Swati, and all your colleagues as well for that fascinating paper. And it was very, moving as well as very timely and topical. So thank you again, Swati. Are there any questions or thoughts or reflections on this particular paper? Please feel free to put in your questions on the chat box, or just raise your hand and we'll identify you with on the screen. Maybe while everyone's waiting, I could abuse my privilege as chair and ask you to maybe reflect, Swati, on the methods, how in terms of conducting the research, in terms of your findings, how does one sort of undertake research in the context of virtual learning? So how do you, if you can reflect on the methodologies for researching virtual learning in the context of virtual learning? What were some of the challenges and opportunities that you as researchers faced? If you could just tell us a bit.
Okay. Of course, I think the other colleagues would also come in. But very quickly, I'll talk about our second study, which is trying to look at the innovative approaches within the context of pandemic. And we are doing a qualitative study here. And we thought of, doing, let's say, more of focus group discussions, etc. But then we realized that that's not working. And therefore, we tried and used the dialogical approach. So where we are also able to build a little bit of rapport with the different stakeholders and more of dialogue, sharing also our experiences rather than having a fixed interview guide or other set of tools. So that worked. Second, with the children, for example, some of our very initial explorations with children have been through the design thinking method, a human-centered design thinking method. So we realized, again, it's not a question answer format that works. So we try and first understand what are some of the key context, key issues, and from there we ideate and create small sessions, small modules, and then try and have an interactive session with the children to get their feedback. So that we found to be very useful, a human-centered design thinking approach and a dialogical approach in qualitative research. Our previous research was mixed method research, trying to understand the quantitative aspects from about 27 schools in Mumbai, trying to understand the learning outcomes and accountability, and of course, also the qualitative aspects of it.
Thank you, Swati. Dinesh, did you want to come in? Sorry, I've just seen you sort of your image. So did you want to add anything to that?
No, not much. I think Professor Swati has already mentioned. Just a few, as you asked, challenges. I think to understand when we are trying to understand the perspective of the children and the learning outcome, and also in the latter study, we're trying to understand how the digitally they are facing. Okay, so that has been mentioned in the presentation also, that there are a lot of challenges because of their social status, because of their space, because of their many other aspects. That is one, but there are also a kind of issues because of their social status. They're like a caste, and their the availability of parents. Okay, so there were like a lot of multiple other issues were also there that we faced to get like a more depth in understanding. But yeah, schools and all that has played a very significant role to get the data and to. Yeah, so just
Great.
a few words. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a quick comment. Well, I mean, it's a comment, and I'm not sure you'll be able to respond within the 1 minute that you have. But there is a comment or a question that has come in the chat box from Pema. There are lots of these problems faced by various underprivileged groups. Do you have any approaches you have thought of or practiced to overcome it? I know that's a huge question, and Pema is here in the room. So, did you want to very quickly respond to that very big question in the 1 minute that you have?
I think for the previous question of methodology, there's a link that has been shared by Robin. So you can also, that's one of our published paper. But with the approach about dealing with the problems, yes, essentially, I think it's a huge question that we are all grappling with. But one of our effort has been to use participatory methodologies in both our research, assessment, and interaction. Personally for me, I realize that, or for us, I realize that it helps in inclusion. For example, spaces where there are largely boys or largely men there, how do we look at also very consciously looking at inclusion of different people, not only in terms of rolling out and implementing, but also getting their voices. For me, what I felt is very important is listening to the voices. And for listening to the voices, what is the kind of methodology, participatory methodology, and building rapport really helped. And of course, dealing with the challenges is huge. But as I said, grassroots innovations offer some kind of a pathway to address some of those problems. And like Dinesh said, the caste, class, gender realities are very, very strong, and we have to address that first to be able to do any kind of realistic interventions.
Of course. Excellent. Thank you so much for your thoughts and your reflections, Swati and your team. I'm very grateful. So thank you very much. Let's move on to the second presentation, which is on COVID-19, university education and the shifting cultural narratives in Bangladesh. And I think it's being presented by Farhad Hossain Khan, Syed Arman Hossain, and Abdullah-Al-Fahad. Over to you, gentlemen. You have 8 minutes. You have 10 minutes to make your presentation. At about 8 minutes, I'll start waving my hand and interrupt you. So over to you.
Thank you. I'm Syed Arman Hossain. I'm presenting the paper on behalf of our group. And thanks for giving us the opportunity to present our paper. Now we are going for screen sharing. So here we are. So actually, our topic is how the cultural narrative regarding our university education is shifting due to the pandemic in Bangladesh. So we know there is a common thought process about our education system that university education, especially public universities, are superior to private universities because public universities generate knowledge, and at the very same time, private universities are more inclined to generate graduates. But due to the pandemic, the situation is changing. The current narrative we have is changing because, when the pandemic hit, the economy was strained. And as a result, private and public universities, they had to take different paths. And for that reason, the cultural narrative regarding our higher education has started to change. Especially, you can see that when the pandemic hit, the whole scenario started to change because we know that private universities started to move forward with their online classes while the public universities dawdled. Here, we can take a look at our private and public universities. What do you mean by public universities in the context of Bangladesh? Public universities are mainly run on government subsidies and where students can study virtually free of cost. On the other hand, private universities, they are mainly graduate producing industries. So in public universities, they try to generate knowledge. On the contrary, the private universities, they try to produce graduates for white collar or corporate jobs. So here we can see how the COVID-19 situation changed the cultural narrative. For example, here we see we know already that private and public universities, they have different motives and different activities. When the pandemic hit, what happened? The economy was strained and there was a need to get into jobs as soon as possible. But because of that situation, the public universities who were producing knowledge came under question. And the activities of private universities, actually, they were praised because of their quick activities. Here, we can take a look at what do we mean by cultural narrative. Narratives are culturally traditional linguistic constructs that influence how events are organized. Narratives give us sequential organization that specifies an event's unfolding along temporal lines, but they also provide an explanatory and evaluative framework for understanding how and why events unfold as they do. So actually, we are what we tell about ourselves or think about ourselves in that sense. And what we tell about others, about ourselves and our worlds, is what actually the way we create our own narrative. And all narratives are built around evaluative criteria that enable and guide the selective appropriation of a set of events or elements from the vast array of open-ended and overlapping events that comprise experience. So, in order to do our research, we had to follow a set of methodology, some methods we had to undergo, and we were inspired by Bruno's distinction between two modes of human thought. Firstly, paradigmatic thoughts, which seeks universal truths irrespective of all the things around it. But when we consider narrative mode of thought, it is basically a category of human mind because it deals with vicissitudes of human intention. Now, what methods actually we followed? Firstly, we went for qualitative analysis because we know it's very difficult to analyze how people perceive about the outcomes of this pandemic. Then we had to follow a specific methodology. Actually, we tried to focus on semi-structured and structured interview. And for our data analysis, we tried to
Okay, this is that dreaded moment when the screen freezes. I don't know.
analyze our data.
We're back
with the method.
Sorry, you're Syed, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Sorry. Here we can see that pandemic caused the universities to close down while straining economy globally and locally. At that point, public and private universities diverged. Public universities dawdled.
Sorry to interrupt you again, Syed, but you'll need to share your screen again. We can't see your screen again.
Screen share. Can you see the screen? Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Thank you so much. So what I was trying to say that due to the pandemic, the situation was changing, and at that point, public and private universities diverged. Public universities dawdled and the private ones rushed forward to take online classes and examinations. The situation exposed the fault lines within. As a result, the 100-year-old public universities, they were facing questions. Their activities came under severe criticism, and at the very same time, they were criticized for the lack of accountability, monetary pressure, and differing priorities. Whereas private universities emphasized corporate degrees that enable highly paid white-collar or corporate jobs. On the other hand, public universities were struggling at that moment, and private universities also guaranteed speedy graduation. All these aspects culminated into a new narrative, not education, rather degree is preferable, not knowledge, rather a job-oriented degree is more preferable. Now, to elaborate, a client relationship between the degree seekers and universities is more desirable. So here we can see some opinions of public university students, teachers, sorry. For example, public university faculties, they are not at all happy with the way the administration is taking measures. For example, some are criticizing the administrations for their inner conflicts and dilemma. Some are also criticizing the administration, because administrations are not taking innovative measures because sometimes they think that might create a backlash among the students and that might create controversy. And at the very same time, we can take a look at the private university faculties. Private university faculties, they think their educational institutions are actually graduate producing industries. For that reason, they think that they have to carry on with their academic curriculum no matter what. Whether there's a pandemic or whether there's an earthquake, the show must move on. Otherwise, they will lose their job, they won't be paid. So we can see there is a huge amount of difference. Public university faculties are criticizing the administration because of the lack of accountability. On the other hand, private university faculties, they know that if they cannot proceed with their academic curricula, they will not be paid. So they are bound to move forward with their academic activities. So it is important.
You have 2 minutes left.
Okay. It's also important to take a look at the opinion of the students. Private university students feel that the sooner they will get their degree, the sooner they will get their job. On the other hand, they think that even though they have to pay a lot amount of money, it has become a blessing in disguise. On the other hand, public university students, they are actually showing their ire against the authority because the authority has failed to take necessary measures to carry on their academic activities. As a result, they are lagging behind. So to surmise our research work, what we can find that the economic stressor has exposed the front lines within the public universities. As a result, the cracks which have been forming for a long time has been exposed to a greater extent, and the private universities are rendering the age-old traditional public universities moot. So we can see here that because of because of the diverging priorities and internal dynamics, private universities are moving forward along with their academic curriculum, while the public universities are lagging behind. So private universities are telling the public universities, now it's time for you to catch up. So an outsider can see this phenomena and say, look, private universities are winning in the context of Bangladesh. So if we can take a look at this, we can see that even though there are multiple dimensions regarding this situation, but there's one thing that is coming out now, that client relationship is becoming more preferable because it can ensure speedy graduation and good jobs. On the other hand, what is happening? These things are actually creating a glass ceiling in our tertiary education system. That means after the pandemic, private universities will be more lucrative. And as a result, only a wealthiest section of the society will get benefit, they will get higher education, while the other unfortunate few have to fight for their dwindling opportunities. Thanks for your patience. We'll take questions from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Syed, and to your team for that excellent presentation. Again, raising very topical questions that are of relevance not only to Bangladesh or to indeed to the region of South Asia, but across the world. So that is really very interesting, and we're very grateful that you presented this work here. Again, if colleagues have any questions or comments or thoughts to share, please put them down in the chat box now, or you're also welcome to raise your hand and ask any questions. Needless to say, other presenters are also welcome to ask questions in case you wanted to, compare your notes or exchange your thoughts based on what you've seen. Again, I will abuse my privilege as chair, and maybe while everyone else is, gathering their thoughts, if I could, just ask, you to reflect on the shifting cultural narrative and the privileging of the private providers in education. You said this has been going on for a long time. And I wondered if there was anything at all that could be done to either make the private sector more responsive to the public good, or to reverse the situation where the private sector was, getting so much more powerful, winning, as you put it. So is there any way to use this in some way or the other for the public good? Does your research show any light?
I will be doing the answers for the team.
Please.
What we see that there is a complete disregard among the private universities about producing the jobs that are remotely, that has no, the degrees that provide no corporate job guarantee. It is always considered undesirable to put a friendly word to it, and the public doesn't also, what can I say, the advertisement is such, the economy is such that if you don't have a job, these researches carry no meaning whatsoever in this country. So if UGC, the University Grants Commission in Bangladesh, kind of push forward a more pushing the private universities with more social science degrees, more economics degrees, more philosophy degrees, not just sticking to BBAs, just engineerings and the engineering degrees that create guarantee snappy jobs. It's a social consensus of a job guarantee. There is no such guarantee in a country that has so much competition going on with economic stresses. But what we're doing is we are lagging behind on the and what private universities are advertising themselves as. They are the most effective and efficient. Thus, what the narrative goes, like other educations are pointless. And then the public universities are losing their ground. Like people are saying, okay, the other educations are pointless, so why would you get it? We're talking about these like such conferences are boring, they don't give us jobs and stuff like that. These things are happening. And if private universities are pushed geared towards those degrees other than, no, you just cannot just churn out BBA graduates or engineering graduates every day or anything that is remotely financially helpful. But you have to put in forward with other academia as well. I think this phenomena can be avoided, or else it's going to be just money for degrees, and those who are rich, those are the only one who can get a philosophical education or a job, and others will be left behind fighting and scrapping along.
Thank you. I mean, I think it is such a pertinent issue, again, not only for Bangladesh, but other South Asian, but your South Asian neighbors as well. And there's always a question of what public universities can do, or, to, in objective terms, improve their quality of provision, but also in the more cultural terms, as you said, what can you do to shape the social meaning, if you will, of knowledge?
Yes.
Especially, like you very correctly say, the prospect of a job is socially constructed. There isn't a job necessarily waiting, and I think that's a paradox that's really interesting to think about. Any other questions or thoughts for our colleagues here? Any other? Yes, so Dinesh Chand has a question for you, which is around the public and the private being a global debate. And I suppose to take on, the point that was being made earlier, what is, objectively speaking, the performance of the public universities in Bangladesh? And I can understand, you're wary of sort of going just along material, so-called objective terms, but any quick thoughts?
If we consider mercantile objectivity, where you absolutely have to produce this many graduates, this many papers, this many journal entries, in that case, we can always say that, okay, yes, for that objectively, public universities are lagging behind. We have no qualms about that. Yes, it is true. Still, when it comes down to, like, if that objectivity persists, there is another darker side to that. Private university teachers are forced, like, you have to produce 3 papers or your job is going to be terminated. And then private university teachers produce something for the production's sake, like anything, any research, any paper that is worthy of its salt, it takes time. But when we have 4 months strict academic calendar, 4 courses a minimum to take, and you have to grade all those papers in 3 days of time, 10 days of time, and then doing these researches, they encroach into personal lives, and then it becomes, okay, we have to produce something, let's produce it. Objective performances can also be, rigged, as I can say. The game can be rigged.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Abdullah. There's one question that has come in, I think, over YouTube, which is from Sanjeda Preti. And there's, I think, another question also on YouTube from, there are lots of questions. So I've put them down on the chat box. I don't think, I'm afraid we're going to be able to give you the time to reflect on all of them. But they are related to public universities more broadly and what they might be able to do, in the post-pandemic context. If you have 30 seconds in which you can respond to these sorts of very big questions on what public universities can do, that'll be great, because then we can move on to the other panelists, and I'll leave it to you.
All right, yes. I think I can. You see, education is a global phenomenon. The more less we study, the more like despots and right-wing politicians will have sway over our lives. So what happens is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, what happens is we can go along, if globally we can reduce military spending a little bit and put it on more global education. I think we got public universities and education for all policies sorted. But it's not that simple.
Of course. Thank you. But I think what it does, what your presentation does do is, open up lots of further questions. Again, we will not have the time to go into every question. I apologize to those who've put in their questions, but it does allow you, I think, to, develop these conversations further. Yeah. And the purpose of this conference is to build a network, after all. So these are questions that you cannot and should not resolve right now, but, go on to discuss further. So I wish you all the best in your future deliberations. Clearly, you've opened lots of questions for everyone to think on. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Let us move on to the third presentation of the day, which is by Amartya Sen at the University of Delhi in India. And the title of the paper is Education Through Contagion, Digital Divide and Social Stratification. I've always wanted to chair a seminar with Amartya Sen as the presenter. So, this is a great opportunity. Amartya, over to you. 10 minutes for you to present. At 8 minutes, I'll come in and sort of wave my hand, or maybe just sort of tell you that you have 2 minutes left. So over to you.
I'm unable to share the screen. So, I mean, is it from your end that you're going to bring the PPT? Because
You'll be able to do it now. You'll be able to do it now.
Okay. Is my screen visible? Hello?
Yes.
Am I visible?
No.
Okay. Does that really matter?
No, to be honest. As long as we can see the screen, I think that's fine.
Yeah. So, education during contagion, digital divide and social stratification, some reflections. The COVID-19 pandemic has interrupted all facets of our daily lives. It has impacted all levels of education system as well, forcing the inclusion or incorporation of technology tools in education across the spectrum. Thus emerged the popular concept of e-learning and e-exam during the pandemic. Many digital evangelists prophesize that online education is futuristic, transformative tool capable of making learning a visually and intellectually engaging experience from the comforts of home. Some considered it as an alternative medium created to exploit the situation engendered by the pandemic. On the other hand, many others decry that online education may lead to mechanical understanding, bereft of purpose, interaction, and emotional connect that are integral to the learning process. The introduction of information and communication technologies produces varied outcomes based on 3 A's, that is accessibility, affordability, and acceptance. Accessibility refers to the set of activities that empowers the user to use technology, while affordability is the level at which the consumer can bear the cost of ITC service. Acceptance, on the other hand, pertains to technology innovation and is influenced by behavioral and social factors. The objective of our education system should be to focus on equity and equality parameters, which are central to the implementation of sustainable development goals. These begs the question, do the households or students have adequate access to digital infrastructure essential to effectively partake in online education? I apologize the typo here. That it should be ESPESSILLY. So especially do all the students in general and students from the disadvantaged socio-economic group in particular have access to computer and smartphones with a robust internet connection to smoothly take classes for hours on. Now, the National Statistical Office, in its 75th round held in between 2017 to 18, brought out some data that's relevant to our discussion. The NSO data informs that 9% of households in India have both a computer at home and access to internet in 2017-18. While the proportion is 20% in urban India, it is paltry 4% in rural India. The situation doesn't improve even if we limit our remit to households having school or college going students, for example, let's say between 5 to 35 years age group, who are currently enrolled in some course, have a computer at home and access to internet. Thus, over 90% of the currently enrolled students don't have access to necessary resources and are constrained from effectively participating in online education. The low access is further exacerbated by the stark socioeconomic disparities. Only 4% of the currently enrolled Adivasi and Dalit students have a computer and access to internet. The situation improves marginally among other backward classes, which is 7%, and Muslims, which is 8%. Far worse is the access among students from bottom quintile, the poorest 20%. Just have 2% out of them. 20% have 2% of computer and internet access. On the other hand, among the top quintile, the richest 20%, 28% have necessary tools of learning. Now there is also inter and intra-state disparities, which I would like to deliberate on through some data. More than 20% of the students from states such as Kerala, Sikkim, Goa, Mizoram, and Nagaland have computers at home and access to the internet. The proportion goes down to 5% in states such as Bihar, Jharkhand, Orissa, Tripura, and Andhra Pradesh, which is supposedly at the bottom of the SDG ladder. The situation is even bleaker in rural areas of several states. The proportion of currently enrolled students having a computer and access to the internet is just 1%. In rural Karnataka, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, 2% in Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, 3% in Maharashtra and West Bengal, and 4% in Gujarat and Uttar Pradesh. By contrast, Kerala and Goa, with 19% and 28% respectively, remain at the other end of the spectrum. So you can see, in a country, even the availability and the infrastructure is not uniform. There are these states who are quote unquote developed, and there's the states who are underdeveloped. So the difference persists. Understandably, the proportion of students having a computer and access to internet is relatively higher in urban areas. However, that doesn't imply that a large proportion of urban students from all states have access to these amenities. The proportion is 9% in urban Andhra Pradesh, 14% in Jharkhand, 15% in Madhya Pradesh, 16% in Odisha and Telangana. At the other end are states such as Assam, Goa, Punjab, with proportionally 31% of the required infrastructure. Nagaland is a top performing state with 44%. So far as smartphone, the next best affordable alternative to computer is concerned, NSO data reveals that about 6% of rural and 29% of urban households had either a smartphone or a computer in 2014. The recent NSO survey suggests that 17% of currently enrolled students had access to internet at homes, either through smartphones or computer in 2017. Also, a Pew Research Center report informs that 24% of adults in India reported owning smartphones in 2018. Smartphone ownership in India is arguably one of the lowest among the developing economies. The ownership levels might be even lesser among the poor and the marginalized. Besides, a sizable proportion of smartphones might be of low-end budget, which may not be adequate for regularly accessing online education. This implies that long-duration online classes via smartphones are likely to create operational issues and anxieties. It is clear that students from a vast majority of households in many states are likely to be left behind when it comes to access to resources that are crucial prerequisites to participate in and benefit from online education. The lack of access is quite high amongst students from poor households and marginalized social groups. With such limited access and stark disparities, can online education facilitate inclusive and empowering learning for all? We have reason to suspect that this is a distant dream. Abrupt launching of massive online education projects without improving access to resources and bridging the digital gap might deepen the pre-existing socioeconomic disparities in education.
Amartya, you have 2 minutes to conclude.
Yeah, this is the last slide. Why now? The question is, why online education? Antonio Gramsci used the word subaltern to signify a group of people who are subordinate to the hegemonic class. Hegemony is the mode of using non-coercive authority. According to Gramsci, within a society, the dominant class mostly asserts its authority through non-coercive method, that is, by convincing the entire population that the interest of the ruling class is the interest of the entire population. This non-coercive assertiveness by a particular class over the other group of people is referred to by Gramsci as hegemony. Ranojit Guha, in his essay on some aspects of historiography of colonial India, presents the term subaltern in contrast to the term elite. For Guha, the elite was constituted not only by the European colonizers, but also of the dominant indigenous groups who had access to hegemony, either through the association with colonial government or through the Western style of education or through money power. Thus, in a more general context, the term elite represents all sections of society which have political and economic agency. In other words, the elites are people who can intervene and articulate their self-interest across arenas behind the adoption of online education underlies this theoretical precept. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amartya. If you'd like to close the presentation and so that people can sort of see you. So if you want to switch on the video, that'll be excellent. Yeah, great. Well, again, a fascinating.
So it's a different Amartya.
That's a fascinating presentation. So that's wonderful to hear from you. And I think there's a lot of data there which I think our colleagues would love to know more of, and maybe also want to question you further. I think it's also interesting that you ended with a reference to subaltern studies and this question of elite subaltern sort of contradictions, which is obviously something that we cannot ignore in the context of stratified societies, again, not only in South Asia, but across the world. So that's really something to mull over. If you have questions, audience members, please put them into the chat box now so we can take them up. And for those watching on live stream on YouTube, if you put the questions in the column in YouTube, then our colleagues will send them over to us. Again, while colleagues are waiting, if I could sort of, provoke you a bit, Amartya, on the last slide that you presented, where you talked about the elite subaltern dichotomy. And I can completely agree with you in terms of the way in which digital technologies are, in fact, elite technologies, which are, being sort of universalized in the way that both Gramsci as well as Ranajit Guha alerted us. But remember, Ranajit Guha also talked about in subaltern studies, and his entire corpus of work was on how subalterns don't just sit back passively. And one of the things that Ranajit Guha tells us is how subalterns appropriate elite technologies. And because you invoked Guha, I wondered if you had anything to say about how subalterns, in this case, those who are digitally excluded, may actually try and appropriate digital technologies so that a technology that is elitist today may be actually taken over and appropriated by subaltern groups in their own interests. Because after all, as we know, no hegemony is complete and total. Hegemony always has cracks, and there are cracks that subaltern or people outside the hegemonic bloc, to use your terminology, people outside the hegemonic bloc are constantly pushing against it. So if you have any thoughts on subaltern appropriation of digital technologies, that'll be great. And in the meantime, other colleagues can please put in their questions.
This has also to do with our understanding of politics, since these people who are in the lower rung of society also form a considerable portion of the vote bank, so to speak. So in a way, so this is this entire thing, the government of Assam said that we are going to provide you with this smartphone, right? So and then in West Bengal, I'm told that government provided a fund for this tap thing. So the situation is such that we don't have an alternative. The search for alternative has taken the center stage of our discussion. It's the situation is such that either we take part in the system or we are left out, and the expense of left out is huge. So they are asserting themselves through their political agency, through the political subjectivity that look, we are a vote bank, and our concerns need to be heard and need to be brought on the table. So provide us this, and then so that's where that's the basic thing from where this populist, if I can term it that, schemes come out. So that's I hope it addresses your question.
Of course, and these are, again, questions that people have been sort of debating for centuries. So we're not going to address this within this conference, but that's a helpful response. Thank you. Any further questions or thoughts for Amartya's paper? Great. Okay, so well, thank you again for that paper. And again, if there are comments or questions, please put them over in the chat box, and I'm sure they can be taken up further. Our last presentation today is by Pushpa Palanchoke. I understand that Pushpa has sent in her presentation already, but is here to take any questions and answers. So is the plan, Mohini, that we'll play the presentation on and then Pushpa can come in at the end to answer the questions?
Yes. So
Yeah.
we'll just have the recorded presentation on now. And for the audience Q&As, Pushpa's around.
Yes, yes.
Sorry, could you hear that?
No,
we don't.
no, we can't. It's gone.
Sorry about that. Give me a minute.
Hello everyone, my name is Pushpa Palanchoke and I am a graduate student at Kathmandu University School of Music. I am also the program coordinator for Satori Center for the Arts Folklore program. Folklore is a community-based arts program that responds to the needs of indigenous music groups in Nepal. Since early 2020, we have been working closely with Tonani Dafakhala, an indigenous music group from Kirtipur, an urban settlement that is over a millennia old and is located in the Kathmandu Valley. My presentation today reflects on the group's recently held apprenticeship program that was supported by Folklore. As part of our support, we had introduced a couple of digital programming initiatives to mitigate the risks of meeting in person during the pandemic. Our experience suggests that digital learning platforms are not able to accommodate the embodied and socially situated knowledge that is shared during the apprenticeship program. Well, Dafa is a musical genre with over 400 years of documented history among the Newars, an indigenous community from the Kathmandu Valley. It is a community-based practice that is intertwined with the urban, spiritual, and seasonal lifestyle of the Newars. Although traditionally it was only men from a community who participated in the group, female participation is increasingly more common. Folklore supported the introduction of women into Tonani Dafakhala's apprenticeship program this year. TDK, Tonani Dafakhala, is one of 19 Dafa groups in Kirtipur. Using drums and cymbals, the group sings songs based on texts that have been handed down for generations in a safu, a book or manuscript. These manuscripts have songs dating as far back as the 12th century. Dafa songs are mostly sung in the language of Newars, Nepal Bhasa, but two other languages, Maithili and Sanskrit, are liberally mixed within the songs. These songs are on a variety of topics, including love and romance, tragedy and revelations, nature and farming, crops and harvest, fruits and flowers, and prayers to various deities. Dafa groups are community-based and are tied closely to local customs and seasonal activities. They play an important role in the annual festivals that mark the Newar calendar. Dafa groups are a part of many sacred dances, dramas, performances, and celebratory processions held throughout the year. To give you an example, Tonani Dafakhala brings out a ritualistic dance performance and a procession called the Devi Pyakha, meaning the dance of goddess. The procession is conducted every year on the 11th month of the Newar calendar. It features masked dancers representing the gods and goddesses of the city, accompanied by Dafa music. Besides such huge public events, the Dafa Khalas also partake in private events like life rights celebrations of community members. In this regard, the Dafa's apprenticeship programs are not just about learning to sing and play, they are an initiation into the traditions and practices of the Newar community. Since the conquest of the Kathmandu Valley by the Gorkhali Empire in the late 1700s, Newar indigenous culture has been suppressed by the Nepali state. For a while, it was illegal to speak, write, and publish in Nepal Bhasa. In addition to this, Nepal's education system was designed to gradually eradicate indigenous language in favor of Nepali, the state-sponsored language of the ruling Brahmins and Kshetris. Nepali education in schools privileges conceptual thinking, the Nepali language, and a Brahmanical patriarchal value system. This has resulted in a perception of Dafa music as being primitive and of the past. Much of what TDK does is understood under the broad terms of heritage and tradition. Newar youth see little use for their mother tongues in a global economy and understand Dafa to be an ossified relic of the past. Dafa practice is interpreted as a tradition that is just about repetition, lacking creativity. The marginalization of indigenous knowledge is not surprising in today's world. TDK's knowledge is embodied in the practice and routine of its practitioners and situated within the land, life cycles, and physical infrastructure of their community. It does not always fit into or conform to the ways that knowledge is understood and interpreted through the lens of colonial and Eurocentric epistemologies. TDK's own understanding of embodied ways of knowing is perhaps best illustrated in the central role played by the god of music, beauty and aesthetics, Nasadya. Without any distinctive form, Nasadya is often just represented as a cavity, a triangle, circle, square, or rectangle that is pressed into a wall. Nasadya has a direct relationship with Dafa musicians and their community. The musicians understand that it is Nasadya who enters into them, and it is the Dya that is singing and playing music through them. The Dafa group, the music they play, and the community together communicate a language that comes into being through practice. Dafa practice in Newar communities is on the decline. TDK, for instance, had not hosted an apprenticeship program for over 40 years. TDK's elders attributed this to a decreasing interest in the tradition among younger generations. However, the recent adoption of a federal structure and the formation of local governments has changed this dynamic, with local communities gaining an opportunity to shape their local and educational system. Prior to an involvement in their attempts to revive Dafa practice in their community, TDK had moved their Akache, their learning space, which translates to House of Letters, into a public building. The building's construction was made possible by the newly formed local governments under Nepal's new federal structure. Traditionally, the Akache was hosted inside a master's house. TDK's decision to move the Akache to a public venue was inspired by the need to revitalize the community. The Akache is an institution of high value among Newars because it is a gateway to not only musical knowledge but provides a grounding for their indigenous knowledge as well. Each apprentice is initiated into Newar ways of being in this space. It is a space where young community members learn about their community and begin their growth into their public selves. In this sense, it is a deeply democratic institution that brings individuals together to form a polity. In early 2020, we started working with TDK to help them start their apprenticeship program. The Dafa masters also decided to open the tradition to women, other ethnicities and caste groups who live in their community. Building up to the apprenticeship program, we organized 2 virtual events, a storytelling workshop for youth and a discussion series. I will talk about what we did and why we did them later, but before that, I would like to tell you about the apprenticeship itself. During the apprenticeship, apprentices learn under a master for 6 to 12 months. The learning and teaching processes are not like that of a school. Skills and knowledge are communicated by sharing a space and by doing an activity, playing musical instruments and singing together. During these sessions, the masters share stories and talk about their community, but learning also happens through observation, mimesis, and repetition. In early 2021, between the first and second waves of the pandemic, TDK started its apprenticeship program. However, the second lockdown announced on 2nd May 2021 brought the apprenticeship to halt. The first program we organized was a virtual storytelling workshop. The workshops intended to engage younger community members with their elders from TDK, encouraging them to listen and share stories with each other. While the elders in TDK showed an interest in the workshop, they were not able to convince the younger generation. The workshop was held with 5 youth participants out of the 10 who had shown an interest. For many of the youth, with school classes also happening online, coming online for additional hours was not appealing. Even for those who attended the workshop, it was often difficult for them to connect the activities and the conversation they held online to the Dafa music their elders played. In November, we organized an online panel discussion series, Dafa Calling. Discussions were held on traditional knowledge, ritual and pedagogy in the Dafa tradition, and the challenges and prospects faced by Dafa groups. While the event was successful in engaging a wide range of participants, including international academics, local culture activists, musicians, and local government representatives, many of TDK's practitioners were unable to attend. While a lack of digital literacy might appear to be the primary reason for low participation, there are some deeper issues at play. We felt that Dafa members, especially the elder masters, were unable to really engage in the discourse. While we had hoped that the elders would be able to participate in the conversations, The digital platform, we use Zoom, dislocated them from the way DAFA knowledge is expressed and embodied. They come together as a group in a public space. So we observed a disconnect when the community was online, especially when they were on their own without the presence of other group members. After all, DAFA is not a genre of music that can be sung alone, and within Newar society, all aspects of its performance are intricately tied to the community and its activities. Digital tools, in other words, have significant epistemic limitations in their ability to share embodied knowledge and provide a learning ground for indigenous knowledge. So here I end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that very evocative presentation. I'm hoping that everyone was able to hear it all right. So thank you, Pushpa. That was very, very interesting and also a very nice way of delivering it. Thank you. So Pushpa is here for any questions, and we've already got one actually here. So Pushpa, if you'd like to take that. Would you say there's an intergenerational digital divide between the community, and how can we help bridge this divide in the artistic context? Pushpa, if you have any thoughts, please go for it. That was from Devika.
Well, firstly, I would quickly like to acknowledge my directors at the folklore program, Pranab Singh and Swati Singh, and Dr. Amina Singh, who are also present in this room for their guidance in putting this presentation together. And going to the question that has been asked by the conference team.
By Devika, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so we do find that there is this digital divide within the community, and we cannot really say if this is an intergenerational digital divide, particularly because I don't know what would that mean when we say intergenerational digital divide. So yeah, if you can clear a bit about what you mean when you say that. But there is absolutely this gap between two generations already, because as I also mentioned it in the presentation, that the overall lifestyle of Newar people, which earlier based totally in agriculture, and the lifestyle overall was agriculture based, and now with the urbanization and with the ghettoization, the whole community and the lifestyle have changed so much. And now that the new generation of people are more into are kind of full-time engaged in institutions like schools and other non-agriculture based jobs, there is this generational divide, obviously. So to bridge this divide, we in folklore program keep that as one of our objectives. So what we have been doing is we are creating an environment for the younger generation to appreciate the music tradition. So what we have been doing since past 1.5 years is we are organizing different kind of events, especially exchange events where the elderly generation can come in contact with the younger generation, not just from their community, but with the outsiders as well. So we are creating this environment where the people from outside of the community, irrespective of caste and gender, can come in contact with the elder generation and learn about the tradition, put their inquiries among the elderly community members, elderly community practitioners. So that's what we've been doing. And in near future, we also have plans to we also have plans to revive some of their lost folk tale performances, and we are working on it in a manner that the younger generation, once again irrespective of the gender or the caste, to be the party, to participate in the overall choreography itself. So yeah, that's what I would say. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for that response. And I think that does address the question of digital divide and the intergenerational digital divide very effectively. So thank you, Pushpa. We will now have to wrap up this session, but I would like to thank everyone for their presentations as well as for your questions and to everyone for listening. So thank you so much once again, and back to you, Mohini, to tell us what to do next.
Thank you so much, Indrajit, for taking over so seamlessly, taking over the session and sharing it so brilliantly. It was really a delight to have you here and have your inputs on all of the presentations. And thank you to all the wonderful presenters. You've left us so much to think. You've left us with so much to think about this topic. So thank you so much for putting it together, putting in so much effort into each presentation, and being here and answering questions. I hope there's been some takeaway for all of you as well in terms of the questions and answers that you sort of discussed at the end. So thank you so much. This was really great to listen to. And we've eaten into our lunch break a little bit, but we have 45 minutes now before our next session. Our second roundtable for the day begins at 2 p.m. UK time. And this roundtable will be on rethinking gender in education. We have some excellent academics and activists who work on gender in Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, and Nepal, who will be speaking at the roundtable. So please do join us. This will be in room A. I hope you have the details, and it'll anyway be live streamed on YouTube. So I hope you'll join us in either place. Thank you so much and enjoy the break. Please feel free to head over to our YouTube channel in the break if you like and watch our recorded presentations. We'll paste the link on chat here now. Thank you again for all of you who were here and watched the presentations and engaged through the questions and answers. Thank you so much, and see you